So Mildred was the church gossip, self-appointed arbiter of church's morals, and she kept sticking her nose in other members' private lives. And while the church members were unappreciative of her activities, they still kind of were a little hesitant that her gossip might reach something about their lives. And so she made the mistake, however, of accusing George, a new member, of being an alcoholic after she saw his truck parked outside the front of the town's only bar. He has a red truck. She says, easy to see. We know what goes on in there. So she commented to George and others that everybody that was seeing that red truck out in front of that tavern, would know what he was doing. And George just kind of looked at Mildred. He was a man of few words, and he stared at her for a moment, and then he just walked away. He didn't explain himself. He didn't defend himself. He didn't deny. He just said nothing. He walked away. But later that evening, he drove his red pickup truck over to Mildred's house, parked it in front of her house, and he left it there overnight. So there you go. I want to talk with you today about problems that can seem overwhelming and to see what we can do about those. I have a friend from my community in Nashville, Will, and he was running a startup company, and he had a lot of people working for him, and he had a research department and development and manufacturing and marketing and design and a bookkeeper and accounting and all of that. And everybody was working as a team that they do now with those, those startup companies. Everybody works as a team to make the company successful. He believed in his product. He believed in what he was doing, but he kept encountering, he came in for counseling because he had problem after problem with the launch, with the design, with the equipment, with the investors, and everything seemed to be going wrong. And he felt responsible for it. He thought, I've hired all these people, their livelihoods, their careers, their jobs are depending on me, my family's depending on me, the investors are depending on me, and he was really beginning to wonder if his business was going to make it, if it was the right path for him, and if it wouldn't be better to just bag it and go back to corporate America and work for someone else and not have all that pressure and all that responsibility. He was working what felt like 24/7 to build the company. His nerves were fried. He was overweight. He was stressed out. He rarely spent any time with his family. And finally, he broke out in shingles. And it was so painful, he had to stop working. He just had to stop working. And it stayed with him for quite a long time. All that to say, does it sometimes feel like your best intentions get covered over? Does it feel like your life is spinning out of control, or somebody has hung a sign on you that says temporarily out of order? Do you get so stressed out that you watch those Southwest Airlines commercials, where they do some activity and then it ends with "want to get away"? Do you want to get away? I've had a couple of those experiences that I can't talk about as a minister, and I've just, in the moment that they've happened, I have wanted to get away for sure. Well, believe it or not, there is a spiritual law that will restore peace and well-being to our lives. And what I want to share with you today is the spiritual law of balance. And I want to show you how you can use it when frustration mounts so that you can rise above all the chaos. And I think you'll be surprised how the spiritual law of balance works, because it works in a way that feels counterintuitive to the goodness that we have come to expect from the working of spiritual law. The spiritual law of balance is illustrated in Genesis by the great flood that Noah experienced. Now, you'll recall the story. It's in Genesis chapters 6 through 9, but the story actually begins in chapter 6 with an interesting and somewhat disturbing passage. In Genesis 6:5, it says, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time." Ooh, the the Lord saw the wickedness, the great wickedness of the human race, that every imagination of the heart was only on evil all the time. Now, you've heard me say when we talk about the word evil in the Bible that I like to consider it as the word live spelled backwards, right? The word evil is the word live spelled backwards. And that when there's evil in our lives, we're living backwards from the truth of who we are, from the truth of our authentic spiritual nature. And in the flood story, we see that the people on earth, we're told the people on earth were languishing in a state of negativity, and the Lord responded to the negativity by sending a flood. The word Lord is the word law, or you can substitute spiritual law. So if you're languishing in negativity, spiritual law is going to respond to that negativity by sending negativity, right? Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind, the law of mind action, right? It's going to respond by sending negativity to restore balance, Now, in that story, Noah was instructed, you'll remember, to build an ark, to gather his family, to take 2 of every living creature into the ark, and to stay in there until the waters subsided. Remember, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and then after the storm, Noah reached dry land and agreed to stay spiritually minded and made a covenant with God to stay spiritually minded, and God made a covenant with Noah then that no more floods would destroy the earth. So when you make a covenant to stay in right thinking, to stay spiritually minded, no flood, no catastrophe could come upon you. And it says God sent a rainbow as a promise, eternal promise of safety and security. Well, in unity, we don't believe in a punishing, score-keeping God. We don't interpret the flood to mean that God was punishing humankind for evil behavior. Neither do we believe that God or universal laws are set up to harm us. They're set up to bless us. So what's going on in this flood story, in this wiping out of everything that was meaningful to life? Well, I went to the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary to look up how they treat flood. And it says, when the faculties of mind have been used in wrong relation to truth, when our consciousness is in a state of corruption, spiritual law comes forth to regulate it. Who knew? It's like a self-governing, I say Christ self-governing mechanism that's set up. When you get down the road so far in your consciousness in a state of corruption, spiritual law is triggered to come forth to set in motion something that will regulate it, that will bring it back into balance, back into harmony. We experience different kinds of floods, right? Sometimes there's a total wiping out in our lives. We've been through those kinds of floods. Sometimes, like Will in the opening story, we work long hours building so much tension and stress that our body rebels and shuts down, and we have a flood of negativity in our health. Sometimes we're subject to an environment that's filled with anger or drama or emotional trauma, and in that flooding experience, we shut down emotionally, or we strike back, we strike out. Our floods are not only physical, but sometimes they're mental. We may be swallowed up in a flood of negative thought, and we may want to make an overcoming to turn our lives back to happiness and joy again, to get out of that lackluster, doldrum, depressed feeling because we're just kind of flooded with negativity about our lives. Maybe you've been down on yourself and you want to be more positive, enjoy again. You have that flood of negative thoughts. Sometimes we're just simply flooded with our to-do list, right? 20 things on your to-do list. You can't get them all done. You prioritize your top 3 because you're a type A planner, and you think you can't even get the 3 done, but you can't not pick up the kids from daycare. You can't not get to the pharmacy to get that essential medication. And there you sit in traffic, blocked, wondering how you're going to get to the pharmacy before it closes, how you're going to get to daycare to pick up the kids before it closes, and they put them out on the curb, you know. In that frustration, there's a flood of negativity and fear and frustration and overwhelm. And if you let yourself stay in that little stream of thought turns into a tributary, which turns into a rushing river, which turns into a flood, and there you are in overwhelm. So what to do? What to do? How do we restore balance? As I mentioned in my announcements, in Prosperity's 10 Commandments, there's a part that Georgiana Tree West talks about that I was surprised to read. I really liked it, and I wanted to share it with you this morning. And she talks about the spiritual law of disintegration. Who knew, right? Who knew? She said, when someone goes through seeming ruin in the realm of finance, or perhaps the emotional realm of love and harmony, or the realm of health, and comes through the ordeal better and finer, less material-minded and more spiritual-minded than before, we say that he or she has passed through a disintegration process. You know, we always think about overcoming and rising up and being more. And we don't think about the tearing down and the breaking down and the dissolving. He or she has passed through a disintegration process. And then the way she said this next part, I was particularly struck by it. There are many interesting things to be learned about this disintegration process. Oftentimes, we are in a set of circumstances that no matter how well they satisfy our material desires, they fail to satisfy our soul. Ever been in a job that you made great money, but it just was, you didn't like it? Or, you know, I was trying to think of those experiences. No matter how well it satisfies our material desires, it fails to satisfy our soul. She says, no matter how well our physical needs may be cared for, we have a sense of something lacking, a divine discontent. When through lack of wisdom, we fail to see our soul's need and therefore fail to satisfy it, it's then that the material wealth and the material surroundings that are blinding our true vision begin to drop away from us. You can't stay, you can stay in that job that you don't like, that isn't satisfying because you're there for the money or the health benefits, right? Years ago, I can remember people saying, I can't leave my job because I'd lose my benefits. That's not even now when benefits are $1,000 a month. That was back then when benefits were like $150 a month. You'd stay and do something every day that you hate for 40 hours a week for $150 a month? What is that? That's not even 70, it's $35 a week? And what are you doing to your body? What are you doing to your consciousness when you stay in something that you don't like for the benefits, the health benefits? I'd rather just get a part-time job and pay for the benefits and go do something I love, right? So the disintegration process, when through lack of wisdom we fail to see our soul's need and therefore fail to satisfy it, the spiritual law of disintegration begins to happen. The material wealth and the material surroundings that are blinding our true inner vision will drop away from us. The disintegration process will set in. And one by one, we will lose those things which we had considered so important. And in the struggle to retain them, we come face to face with our real inner self. Life will take on a new meaning. And out of the ashes of the old, the new self will rise and we will build again, more truly, more firmly, more lastingly than before. The old self has passed away in that general disintegration process, and the new self that has risen from the ruins is nearer our real self, a better expression of the indwelling Christ. So the spiritual law of disintegration which is the spiritual law of balance, tells us that when we're not in right relationship to our soul's satisfaction, things are going to begin to decay. The material things, the material wealth and the possessions and the comforts and all the stuff is going to begin to decay. So how do we restore balance? How do we come face to face with our inner self and make that shift when we're flooded over with something? And it is the use of the spiritual law of balance. There is a restoring balance. And if we let it, that flood, that disintegration, can give us, as it said in her writing, deep realizations of spiritual truth, of where we're just off a little. You see, we're all in our own spiritual growth here at a level that's pretty advanced. And we don't have these big catastrophes in our life anymore. Our lives run along at a pretty good clip. So now our spiritual growth is coming from a more refined, more subtle fine-tuning of these things that keep us locked into the wrong path. I mean, we get on, you know what I mean? It's more subtle. Our teaching, our spiritual advancement comes from a more subtle refinement in consciousness. The big glaring things most of us have lived long enough to work through, right? Raise your hand if you've worked through a couple big glaring things in your life, right? So now we don't have these big floods so much that wipe everything out. But we have these little annoyances, these little irritations, these little family problems, these little health issues, these little things that we know the principles, and yet we just can't seem to get past it. So how do we do that? Well, the flood can awaken us, that little stream of irritations, which it's more for us than a flood. If we let it, can awaken us to the ways of being and doing and thinking that we need to eliminate to get back on track for our best life. It is a refining of consciousness. And Noah is told to build an ark and to stay in it until the negativity is washed away, to abide in the realization of the one presence, the one power, the one love, to be lifted up above the chaos, and to let the spiritual law of disintegration take care of that, dissolve that out of our lives. Are you following me? Metaphysically, Noah's name means rest, calm, and peace. So we're instructed to move into a state in the chaos, in the flow of irritations, in the flow of nuisances. In order to refine our consciousness, we're advised to move into that rest and calm and the assurance of spirit, and to follow its guidance regardless of what all the other people are saying. He said, build the ark, and he started to build the ark, and everybody said, what are you doing? And he was following the guidance of spirit for his life. And when we have a regular practice of prayer, we are training the imaginings of our heart. Remember, in the beginning it said, the Lord saw how the great wickedness of the human race had become on earth, and that every inclination, every imagining of the human heart was on evil all the time. But when we have a regular practice of prayer, which most of us here do, we are training the imaginings of our heart toward the good only. So the little streams that come along are only going to flow into rivers and floods of good in our lives. And then when we live in that Noah consciousness of rest and peace and calm in the midst of a disturbing experience, we understand that when we conform to what God is revealing in us, far from involving loss of any good, our lives are enriched. And we're moved to a place of a better life, an enriched life. As we give mental agreement to the positive imaginings of our heart, we ignite the power of the infinite and the spiritual forces that created and sustain the whole universe will rise to help us. So there is this aspect in consciousness, this Noah aspect in consciousness, which invites us to remain calm and in peace in the midst of a frustrating flood of experiences. And then we're told to build an ark. And metaphysically, the ark represents that place of refuge, of protection and safety. It's a state of mind that's constructed by you, that's developed over time, board by board, faith moment by faith moment, prayer by prayer. You build your ark. And it's the spiritual understanding that there is an infinite intelligence in the universe, an infinite organizing presence in the universe. And its function is to keep order and to keep harmony and to keep beauty and to keep peace. And so you get into that rest and calm state. And you move into that habitation, that ark, that sanctuary of peace, and you abide there. In your ark, you're guided by an infinite intelligence that knows how to restore the balance. It's not your part to figure it all out. It's your part to stay in that elevated place until you can retreat into that ark and say to any experience, peace be still. I like to say, pace be still, right? Because when there's a flood of experience in my life, it feels like the pace is out of control. It's the flood that it's just too much. It's just too much. And so I like to say, peace be still, pace be still, and let myself rest in that calm assurance, in that Noah consciousness, and get into that sanctuary where I know I'm protected from all that's going on out here, and I can just allow the waters to dissolve and wash things away. It's emphasized in Psalm 91 and some of the Psalms that Marty mentioned in his meditation. In Psalm 91, where there's a promise for the one who dwells in the secret place of the Most High. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but no harm shall come nigh thee. And this is a refinement of consciousness that we're making. That in the nuisances, in the tributaries, the tribulations that are tributaries streaming through our lives, we have the strength of consciousness to rest and live in the assurance that we can just step back from that, and that we'll be safe and protected and guided into right outcomes. As you learn to live in a Noah consciousness of peace and calm, and retreat into the ark in times of trouble, what happens in all of that overwhelm and frustration is the first thing is there is a relaxing of tension in your body and in your thoughts. And then as you stay in affirmative prayer with your heart on God only, you come to know in that part of you that knows that no matter how desperate or destructive or frustrating the condition may seem, that there will be a positive outcome. And the waters will subside, and you will be saved and brought to dry land. You'll come back onto solid footing again. Because when you lift up and you rest in that calm assurance, and you lift up into that ark of peace, that sanctuary of peace, and you kind of get a perspective of all that's going on out there, it can seem unsettling. You know, that spiritual law of disintegration is dissolving things away. And pretty soon, that subsides and you can step out and you're on solid ground for your life again. You're not in that boat that's rocking. You know, you're off the boat and on the dry land. The truth is, we've lived enough spiritual principle to know that the storm abated. It always does, doesn't it? You always get through it. It always stops. And this week I want to invite you to see any flood for what it is, which is really a baptism of spirit. Whatever the conditions of your life that are concerning you, the subtle, finer refinements of consciousness that are going on in your soul and in your life, I want you to know that it's the Spirit of God working in you to restore balance, and that you let Spirit do what it knows how to do. Let infinite intelligence do what it knows how to do to restore balance. And when it seems like everything is being swept away in a big flood of whatever, a tidal wave of negativity, and your whole world is covered over, and you want to book a flight and get away, you can trust that we know this, that when the faculties of our mind return to a poise and a calm of truth, that all things then begin to conform to the perfection of spirit, don't they? I was really blessed by Will when he moved through, as he had time to stay at home and recover from the shingles. He wrote a prayer for himself and for his business, and he emailed it to me. And I want to close with what he wrote, because it was kind of a journal writing, and it was so beautiful. And it just fits this movement of mind that we want to make when we're meeting those flood experiences. So take a moment to relax yourself and close your eyes if you want to, and listen to his words, because even though he talks about building his business, it's about building your life, you know, and the words can work for you. He says, loving presence, cleanse me of anything that would fight against my success. Let any part of me that would argue for my limitations be washed away. Let me release every because, but, maybe, and you just don't understand. Let me have the courage to call on the highest within me. And instead of scaring myself, let me be cleansed of all the false stories like most new businesses fail, or it takes 3 to 5 years before you see any profits, or that you don't have the right skill set, the right contacts, the right marketing plan. You can't find the right employees. The design is flawed. The product needs more development. Let me release any opinions that do not serve my highest good, and have the courage to move forward regardless of what others around me might think or say or do. Especially all the criticism, usually from people who have never done what I'm trying to do, telling me why I shouldn't do it. Let me breathe through all the, that will never work, what makes you think you can do that? If it's such a good idea, how come someone hasn't done it before? Lots of startups go broke. Give me the courage to not let talk of doom and gloom affect me. Doubt is expensive, and I will not sit immobilized with a knot in my stomach, losing sleep at night, sick or afraid to move forward because of fear and doubt and worry that keeps most people playing it safe. My prayer is to open to the baptism of the Holy Spirit. May it cleanse me of anything that would hold me back, keep me small, or limit me in any way. I covenant to keep the imaginings of my heart on success only. I covenant to keep the imaginings of my heart on God only. And so we let that prayer be in each one of us today. Any part of us that would argue for our limitations or be a source of irritation is washed away. And our prayer is to open to the baptism of the Holy Spirit, and to covenant to keep our imaginings on the good only, on God only. And for this realization and this truth, we are grateful. And together we all say, Amen.